Hashtag how translation technology is changing language learning. Hashtag hook. Over 1 billion people are currently trying to learn a second language. And more than 70% of them will quietly give up before they ever hold a real conversation. But here is the part that almost nobody is talking about. The technology that was supposed to fix this problem, instant translation, AI tutors, real-time voice conversion, might actually be making things dramatically worse for some learners, and dramatically better for others. The difference comes down to one critical factor that most apps will never tell you about. Hashtag tease. In the next 10 minutes, you are going to discover how translation technology went from a clunky dictionary in your pocket to a system that can simultaneously interpret 32 languages in real time. You will see the hard data on how these tools actually affect learning outcomes. And then we are going to get to the part that surprised even the researchers, the counterintuitive truth about whether translation technology helps you learn a language or secretly prevents you from ever truly acquiring one. Stay with this, because the answer will completely change how you use every app on your phone. Hashtag background. To understand where we are today, you need to know where this all started. Machine translation has existed since the 1950s. The first serious experiment was called the Georgetown IBM experiment, conducted in 1954. Researchers fed a computer 60 Russian sentences and translated them into English using just 6 grammar rules and a vocabulary of 250 words. The scientists involved predicted that machine translation would be a fully solved problem within 3 to 5 years. They were off by about 7 decades. For the next 50 years, translation software remained painfully literal. Systems like Systran, used by early versions of AltaVista's Babel Fish, worked by matching words and applying rigid grammar rules. The results were frequently hilarious and almost always unreliable. Entire meaning could collapse simply because a word had 2 possible interpretations. Context was completely invisible to these early machines. Then, around 2006, something shifted. Statistical machine translation entered the mainstream. Instead of teaching a computer grammar rules, researchers fed the system millions of parallel texts, documents that existed in 2 languages simultaneously, like United Nations proceedings or European Parliament records. The machine learned statistical patterns. If this word appears in French, that word tends to appear in the English version. It was a significant leap, but it still felt mechanical. Fluency remained elusive. The real revolution came in 2017. A research paper published by Google titled "Attention is All You Need" introduced the transformer architecture, the foundation of every modern language AI you use today. This was not an incremental improvement. This was a fundamental reimagining of how machines process language. Suddenly, context across entire paragraphs became possible. Nuance, tone, even humor became partially accessible to machines for the first time. Hashtag main content. So what does this mean for language learners right now, in practical terms? Let us look at the data. Google Translate currently supports over 130 languages and processes more than 100 billion words every single day. DeepL, widely considered the most accurate consumer translation tool, has been tested in blind studies where professional translators rated its output as superior to human translation in certain language pairs. Apps like Duolingo now use large language models to generate personalized feedback. And tools like Google's real-time transcription and Apple's translation features can convert spoken language almost instantly across dozens of languages. For learners, the access this creates is genuinely remarkable. A student in rural Vietnam can now read authentic French news articles with instant word-by-word translation. A beginner in Germany can have a basic conversation with a native Spanish speaker through a phone screen. Barriers that once required years of study to breach are now dissolving in seconds. But here is what the download numbers do not show you. A 2021 study published in the journal Language Learning and Technology found something uncomfortable. Students who had consistent access to translation tools during reading exercises showed measurably lower retention of new vocabulary compared to students who were forced to use traditional dictionaries or context clues. The reason is neurological. When your brain struggles slightly to retrieve or decode meaning, it creates stronger memory encoding. Cognitive scientists call this desirable difficulty. Remove the difficulty entirely, and you remove the learning. This does not mean translation tools are the enemy. It means the way you use them is everything. Hashtag deep dive. The most sophisticated language learners in the world have figured out something that casual users have not. They treat translation technology not as a shortcut but as a scaffold. There is a meaningful difference between those two things. A shortcut bypasses the hard work entirely. A scaffold supports you while you do the hard work, then gets removed once you can stand on your own. Elite language learners use tools like DeepL or ChatGPT to check their own output, not to generate output for them. They write a sentence in their target language, then use AI to evaluate whether it sounds natural. They notice the differences. They ask why. That iterative feedback loop is accelerating acquisition in ways that traditional classroom instruction never could. Consider what AI tutors are now capable of. Platforms like Speak, which uses OpenAI technology, can have an extended spoken conversation with a learner and then provide pronunciation feedback, grammar corrections, and vocabulary suggestions, all within seconds. Previously, that level of personalized feedback required a paid human tutor. The democratization here is real and significant. But here is what nobody talks about in the breathless press releases. Real-time translation earpieces and glasses, devices from companies like TimeKettle and even Realities, are now good enough that a person can walk into a conversation in Mandarin and follow along almost perfectly without understanding a single character. This sounds extraordinary. And in some contexts, like business negotiations or medical emergencies, it genuinely is. But for the language learner using this technology as a substitute for learning rather than a support for learning, something profound is being lost. You are experiencing the simulation of fluency without building the neural architecture for actual fluency. The moment the earpiece comes out, you are exactly where you started. Researchers at MIT's Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory have been studying what they call language transfer versus language acquisition. Transfer is surface-level comprehension. Acquisition is deep structural internalization. Technology is extraordinary at enabling transfer. Acquisition still requires something that machines cannot yet fully replicate, the productive struggle of your human brain reaching for meaning and failing, then reaching again, and eventually finding it. Hashtag analysis. So what does this mean for the future of language education at a systemic level? The implications are already visible in classrooms around the world. Several school districts in the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom have moved away from translation-based assessment entirely. They now evaluate students on tasks that cannot be completed with a translation app, spontaneous spoken response, creative composition under timed conditions, real-time comprehension of audio with no subtitles. Because if a test can be passed by a machine, it is no longer testing language acquisition. It is testing access to technology. On the other side of this debate, there is a growing movement of educators who argue that fluency in managing translation tools is itself a 21st-century language skill. In professional environments, the ability to work fluidly alongside AI translation, knowing when to trust it, when to override it, and how to edit machine output into genuinely natural communication, is increasingly valuable. Legal translation firms, international NGOs, and global media companies are now hiring what they call post-editors, human experts who review and refine AI translation output. This is a real job, and it requires deep linguistic knowledge to do well. The tension here is genuine and unresolved. Translation technology is evolving faster than educational policy. The tools available to a 12-year-old student today would have seemed like science fiction to a university linguistics department just 15 years ago. Institutions are scrambling to catch up, and learners are largely left to figure out the optimal strategy on their own. Here is the practical synthesis that the research actually supports.